Howdy! I have a new rocket, and it is called Fineas. The reason it's called Fineas is because while most of my projects use thrust vector control, older things like Echo and Scout gimbal the rocket motor for stability, Fineas uses these fins at the back of the vehicle, which turn to give us control forces in flight. The cool thing about this is that if I do it right, we can probably control the vehicle for a lot longer than we otherwise could. We don't need thrust to give ourselves control forces, we just need airspeed. Fineas gets launched from a rail with 10-10 or 1-inch rail buttons, which means that it should be able to fly at like most club launches. It uses the Ava flight computer in here, which controls all 4 servos at the back. They are all individually controlled for each fin. Ava also has control over the cameras on the vehicle. These right here are RunCam split 4K cameras. I really like them. They're very small and low profile, and one of the cameras is hooked up to an FPV transmitter on the rocket. This means that over 2.4 gigahertz, we should be able to get live video down to the ground during flight. And speaking of which, if you want to watch this live, Fineas should be flying tomorrow if you're watching on the day it uploads. The goal is to fly on Saturday, November 20th, and if you want to watch that stream live, which pretty sure I can stream, but there's always issues out in the desert. If you want to try to watch me attempt to stream this live, that will be at patreon.com.gov/shop/BPS.space. It's a weird URL. I don't know why they assigned me that. For its first flight, the goal is just to do a small roll program. So we will roll 90 degrees one way and then 90 degrees back. Out at the front of the vehicle is where our parachutes will come out. The parachute is a 4-foot nylon chute, and actually, this is a bit of a redemption arc. So if you remember the BBR, that was Ava's first high-powered flight, and it was built by Parker Wah. The BBR was a super cool rocket, but met a bit of an untimely end, plowing into the ground at about 180 miles an hour. The main chute didn't deploy because the ejection charge wasn't strong enough for the rocket, but the chute came down in one piece. So this is actually the same chute as was on Parker's rocket that day. So this is hopefully this is the redemption arc for the chute. The chute is deployed with a small piston up here, and it uses redundant charges, which means that we fire one at apogee, and then if we notice our speed is going too fast on the way down, we deploy that second charge. I ran a pop test with about 0.7 grams of black powder, and the chute barely came out during that. So I upped it to 1.5 grams of black powder, and that should get us all set. Now, for some flight details, we can take a look at the open rocket simulation. So this is the open rocket simulation. This is a very rough model of the vehicle. One thing I forgot to mention is that I developed these fins, this fin mechanism, as part of a larger future project, and we will be talking about that in a later future video. So for now, just accept that the fins move, and then I'll tell you how they work down the road. Okay, so here's the open rocket. We've got our nose cone, our 2 body tube sections, our fins at the back, and then this is our motor. Speaking of motors, I chose an Aerotech i205 rocket motor for this first flight. That's gonna get us to about 850 meters. The sim shows us 876, but we have a ton of button head screws on this thing. The drag is way more than the sim thinks it is. When we lift off, our wet mass is just shy of 2 kilograms. So this is a beefy rocket between all of the wires and cabling on board, plus some very high infill parts to sustain shock loads. We have quite a lot of mass. That flight up to 850 meters is gonna have us pull, I think, about 12.7 G here. That is one thing I'm concerned about, is G loading on the vehicle. So the only vehicle that I have sent that hard off the pad in terms of the wiring that I've done is Lumineer. And Lumineer worked, but also there were aspects of it that weren't great. So between all of the flight critical servo cables and the slightly less flight critical camera cables and the pyro cables, battery stuff, all of these things need to be considered in terms of the G loading on the vehicle. I've done a lot of cable management, I've done a lot of cable tie downs, but it's a different type of flight profile than I usually do. Now, I mentioned that this flies on an i205, which is a 29 millimeter diameter rocket motor. There aren't very many rocket motors that I can buy which are more powerful and also 29 millimeters, and we need to keep it 29 millimeters to deal with the fin mechanics, the actuation mechanics. So, how do you go higher and faster if you're constrained on your motor size? You add boosters, right? We need a flight extension type of booster, a flight extension rocket booster for Fineas. Fineas needs a FIRB. The FIRB will help us get to more aggressive, faster, higher flight profiles, but of course, we have to fly Fineas on its own a few times before we do that. So I haven't designed it, but basically the idea is that we will attach a rocket booster to the bottom of this thing, and then we'll have it air start to try like higher, faster, more aggressive flight profiles. That's all coming down the road, and that assumes that like things with these first few flights go well. I have done a lot of CFD, a lot of fluid dynamics to make sure that I understand the control forces I get from the fins. It's a totally dynamic problem because your control force changes as a function of your angle of attack, your barometric pressure, your airspeed, all sorts of things, right? So it's a much more complex problem than TVC was, and we need to make sure that I'm doing it right before we start pushing the envelope. Anyway, that is all I have on Fineas for now. I will show you the flight as soon as it happens. We'll get that video put together. Once again, if you want to watch it live, there is a link in the description to the bps.gov/shop.patreon. And now I will turn it over to me on the couch. Oh hey, I didn't see you there. I was just browsing websites on the internet. Browsing websites is one of my favorite activities to do on the internet, but sometimes it isn't safe. The good news is that today's video is sponsored by NordVPN. A VPN can protect your privacy online, and it stands for Virtual Private Network. Especially when you're in public settings, you might not want everyone to be able to see what you're doing online. I've been using VPNs for a while now, and it's a great way to keep your data from the people who honestly shouldn't have access to it. If you're like me, you use the internet. And if you're even more like me, sometimes you use the internet to watch movies and TV and videos online. Sometimes those videos can be restricted to certain countries, and it can be a real pain to buy plane tickets to go visit those countries so you can consume that content. And the great news is that NordVPN can help you solve that problem. NordVPN does this by masking your location and masking your IP address so that internet service providers can't determine your actual location, and you can shift it to wherever you want. It also encrypts your connection, so even if you are at home, your internet service provider won't be able to see what you're browsing and then sell that data off. You can get started with NordVPN by going to nordvpn.com/BPS.space. That'll get you started with a 2-year plan plus 1 additional month for a huge discount. So once again, that is nordvpn.com/BPS.space for a 2-year plan plus 1 additional month at a huge discount. Thank you very much to NordVPN for sponsoring today's video, and thanks to you for watching. My name is Joe Barnard. I'm going to get back to browsing websites on the internet. May your skies be blue and your winds be low.